Okay, picture this. You're dropped right into the middle of the freezing Arctic, and you've got absolutely zero gear. I mean, no tents, no sleeping bags, literally nothing. Just you, your buddies, and the completely unforgiving elements for 7 whole days. Today, we're diving into this explainer to unpack an absolutely wild feat of human endurance. It's basically a literal countdown to a mental breakdown, and we're going to map out exactly what happens to the human body and mind when you push them to the absolute edge.
So how in the world do you actually survive out there with almost nothing? Well, we first have to understand the literal life or death stakes we're talking about here. Out in the Arctic, the second that sun dips below the horizon, temperatures plummet so fast that the wind chill just instantly zaps your body heat. Get this, it can freeze an exposed limb in just 10 minutes. 10 minutes! If you don't get some kind of shelter before dark, you're not just going to be a little uncomfortable, you are quite literally facing fatal hypothermia.
And that terrifying reality sets in the very moment their boots hit the 2 feet of snow. It suddenly hits them. All they have to survive out there is literally what's currently on their backs. That's it. Zero safety net. So, day 1 instantly turns into this frantic, totally adrenaline-fueled scramble. The single overriding goal? Dig a snow shelter before nightfall. Because out there, the snow is kind of this crazy paradox. It's simultaneously their absolute worst enemy, but also their only insulation from that biting wind.
Now you have to remember, an ordeal like this isn't just a physical test. It is a grueling mental marathon. Here's how it plays out. It kicks off with day 1, which is all high energy and adrenaline. But that fades fast, giving way to days 2 through 4. This phase is brutal. It's known as the trough of despair, where just compounding constant failures nearly shatter the team's spirit. It's that universal feeling of hitting a totally brick wall when you're trying to solve a problem. And all of this tension just builds and escalates toward a massive life-or-death climax on day 5. Knowing this timeline really sets the stage for what true resilience actually looks like.
So, back to the day 1 survival plan. It was super simple, but absolutely vital. Dig a shelter, build a fire, and share warmth. And miraculously, they actually pull it off. They carve out a snow cave and get a fire going. But, when naive, high energy meets extreme conditions, that adrenaline can lead to some really sloppy mistakes. Case in point, while trying to boil some snow just to get drinking water, one of the guys leaned a bit too close to the flames and his pants literally caught on fire. I mean, it's a totally comical disaster, but also a pretty stark reminder of how chaotic survival gets when your brain is overloaded.
Even with that shelter, the sheer visceral reality of night 1 was just brutal. We're talking sub-zero temperatures, which meant the guys had to cram together shoulder to shoulder, essentially like sardines in a freezing tiny snow cave, just to share body heat. It was so bitterly cold that even their heavy-duty camera equipment started freezing up. They made it through the night, but woke up to find solid frost completely covering their sleeping bags. Honestly, it was probably the absolute worst, most bone-chilling sleep of their entire lives. As you can imagine, morale absolutely tanked the next morning. But then, this wild temptation presents itself. A daily evacuation plane flew overhead. The deal was, anyone could shoot a flare and get airlifted out of the freezing Arctic right then and there. But there was a massive catch. To get on that plane, you had to shave your head first. It is such a brilliant psychological twist, right? Giving them a super easy out, but attaching this humiliating, permanent physical cost just to test their resolve and see who actually wanted to tap out.
Okay, but survival isn't only about battling the cold. You also have to navigate, well, daily biological realities. Which leads us to a very important question. Wait, where is the bathroom? Well, in the chaotic scramble to pack their already minimal gear, somebody actually forgot the designated poop tent. So they had to venture out into the freezing woods, totally exposed to the elements. And to make it way worse, the camp was entirely surrounded by these massive, unidentified animal tracks. So they're out there deeply paranoid that a polar bear is just watching them from the tree line the whole time.
Moving on to day 3, the need for calories is getting seriously critical. The plan seemed really straightforward. Hike out to the frozen lake, use an ice auger to drill a quick hole, and catch some fish. But the reality? Crushing. The ice wasn't just thick, it was basically an impenetrable 2.5 feet deep. Their drill literally maxed out. It just bottomed out against the ice without ever hitting water. They were essentially standing on what felt like an endless block of concrete.
The physical toll from these failures hit fast. One of the guys, Chandler, suddenly realizes he has white toes. That is a textbook sign of frostnip. See, when your clothes are soaking wet from digging around in the snow all day and you've got zero food in your system, your body just entirely stops generating heat. Frostnip is that final glaring warning sign right before permanent frostbite sets in and actually kills the tissue. It forced the team straight into emergency medical mode, where they literally had to shove his bare feet into a teammate's armpit just to save his toes.
And the failures just kept compounding. By day 4, they were so desperate for food that they spent 4 grueling hours digging a massive trench. How deep? 6 feet straight down into the snow. They were hoping to reach the ice layer and finally break through to the water. That is 6 feet of back-breaking, crazy calorie-burning labor, and it was entirely in vain. They just hit another solid wall of ice, the sun went down, and they had to retreat to their cave, completely defeated and utterly exhausted.
This endless string of defeats pushed them right to a psychological breaking point. Jimmy, who was already carrying the heavy weight of a previous failed survival challenge, made this desperate internal vow. He just kept repeating, "I'm not failing again." At this point, it wasn't even just about the food anymore, it was about redemption. And it beautifully highlights how totally intertwined your psychological resilience is with physical survival out there. When the elements are actively trying to break you, you literally have to win the battle in your mind before you can win it in the snow.
So, that brings us to day 5, the final push. The stakes couldn't be higher. They are down to one single beef stick to split among the entire team, and a raging blizzard is rolling in, which grounds any rescue planes. The biological math here is just brutal. Eating equals heating. It's this process called thermogenesis, meaning digestion actually creates internal body heat. If they do not secure calories today, their core temperatures are going to plummet and they won't survive the freezing night. It is literally do or die. To survive, they desperately needed a major pivot in their strategy. They had to find thinner ice. So first, they get smart. They use a drone to scout the landscape for a running river, because they know moving currents stop ice from freezing quite as thick. Then, after surviving this totally comical, exhausting attempt at cross-country skiing across the lake, they ditched the skis for snowshoes. Trekking through the deep forest snow, they pushed their bodies to the absolute brink, proving that sometimes working smarter really is the only way to survive working harder.
Now, they're out in a blizzard, completely soaked to the bone, and they need a fire immediately. But out there, surface wood is totally wet and completely useless in a snowstorm. So they pull a classic survivalist tactic, harvesting the dead tree center. By physically smashing open a dead tree with sheer brute force, they expose the bone-dry inner wood. Getting that dry tinder was the literal spark of life they needed to get a fire going, stay warm, and keep fighting while they tried to fish. So with the fire finally blazing, they start drilling into the river ice. And guys, the massive wave of relief they felt here, the auger actually broke through. The ice was only 8 inches thick. That strategic pivot to find running water had actually worked perfectly. They finally had a hole, which meant they finally had a chance. The drone, the exhausting hike, the new strategy, it all paid off. Now, the only thing left was getting the fish to bite.
The tension was just unbearable. But then, the climax. Jimmy hooks a fish and starts screaming, "I got it with my hand." But as he's pulling it up, disaster almost strikes. It catches sideways on the lip of the ice hole. Instead of losing their absolute only meal, in this moment of pure, breathless chaos, Jimmy literally plunges his bare hand straight down into the freezing Arctic water and rips the fish out. It is just an unbelievable moment of triumph after days of absolutely crushing defeat. Awesome, right? But realistically, one small fish isn't nearly enough calories for a whole hungry team. So it became this grinding, massive test of sheer endurance. It took 7 agonizing, freezing hours sitting by that hole in the ice to finally pull up a second fish. Yep, 2 fish after 7 hours. I know, it sounds like a tiny amount of food, but those 2 fish literally meant life. They meant internal heat. Most importantly, they meant the team wasn't going to fail. But remember, survival is a team sport. While the fishermen were out there freezing on the ice, the rest of the crew back at camp was busy building a literal lifeline, a rescue station. They expanded the snow cave so they'd have better shelter, built a massive, roaring fire, and kept pots of hot water boiling. They knew the fishermen would come back bordering on severe hypothermia, and this warming station was the absolutely critical safety net they needed to spike those core temperatures back up the second they walked into camp.
In the end, they cooked the fish, rode out the remaining days, and actually conquered the Arctic. It's an incredibly inspiring testament to human endurance, but it leaves us with a totally fascinating psychological test. So, I have to ask you, if you were in their shoes, would you sacrifice your hair to escape the freezing, brutal reality of the Arctic? Or would you stay, push through that trough of despair, and fight to survive? It really makes you think about what you're truly capable of when the chips are down.
Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.